Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Exhibition Kitchen. We're so happy to have you here virtually. Unfortunately, we can't have you here in person, but after 16 years of having this space, we need to find a way to still have a fun, food-filled event. I'm Carrie Gilcoy, Marketing Specialist, and this is Executive Chef Tom Barton.
Welcome, everyone.
And Tom, at one point during the event, will be doing a demo with some of these lovely ingredients and this awesome-looking lungfish in front of you. But for now, I'm going to pass it over to our Director of Dining Services, Maureen Timmons, who is going to introduce our special guest today. Thanks for coming, everyone.
Hi, everybody. Oh my gosh, so excited. Thanks, Carrie. Thanks, Tom. I am so excited to introduce you to my dear friend, Sophie. She also happens to be an amazing human and lives a very generous, purpose-driven life, very much in alignment with her values. You'll experience this when you hear her start to talk about a book. She not only wrote the book, but she also lives the book as a conscious eater. I'm a huge fan of our guest today, Sophie. This is technically her second visit to the Exhibition Kitchen. She shared a fantastic talk with her first book, which you'll hear a little bit more about later. And we're thrilled to have her back today. Welcome, Sophie. Sophie's second book, How to Be a Conscious Eater, is the perfect pairing of doing your part to change the world through food. She expertly and brilliantly answers the wide range of questions that you'll likely have each day as you eat and shop. Sophie also has the perfect balance between research and humor, making this dining companion as a delicious treat. You'll savor every morsel of her writing, and she offers advice on how to transform the world in words and actions by informed choices that are good for you, others, and the planet. Now, I'm going to read her formal bio. Stay tuned. Sophie Egan is an author, a New York Times contributor whose work at the Culinary Institute of America and now her own agency, Full Table Solutions, has galvanized nationwide movements to help all of us make healthier, more sustainable food choices. From moms to mayors, restaurant chains to food service companies, K-12 school districts to universities, her newest book, How to Be a Conscious Eater, Making Food Choices That Are Good for You, Others, and the Planet. Her first book, Devoured, How What We Eat Defines Who We Are, is a journey into the American food psyche. Sophie has written for the Washington Post, Eating Well, Time, the Wall Street Journal, Bon Appetit, Wired, and Sunset Magazine. She holds a bachelor's degree with honors in history from Stanford and a master's degree from the University of California, Berkeley, with a focus on health and social behavior. Normally, you can find her in the mountains. She's actually there today. And on Twitter at Sophie Egan M and online at sophieegan.com. Today, we're honored to have Sophie with us virtually in the Exhibition Kitchen. Pre-pandemic, she was scheduled to be here in April, and we're thrilled to have her wit and wisdom today. Welcome, Sophie.
Well, thank you, Maureen, for the generous introduction, and thank you to the whole Northeastern Dining team for the invitation. I do wish I could be there eating what is bound to be an absolutely delicious meal that Chef Tom has in store for us. I certainly had a really memorable meal the last time, probably more than one meal, the last time that I was visiting campus, and so enjoy any chance to come by the Northeastern community. So thanks for joining us today. Should be a fun hour or so. So Maureen did more than enough giving you my background, so I'll actually just dive into the book. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And there we go. All right, you can see my screen, yes? Great. So conscious eating, what it is and why it matters. This book is really trying to provide essentially a mental checklist for making food choices over the long haul by asking yourself a series of 3 questions. Is this food good for me? Is it good for others? And is it good for the planet? Now, this is very simple. The idea is that it's memorable, it's evergreen, and it really can handle the wide range of questions that circle through any of our minds as we're navigating the absolute circus that is the food environment we inhabit, particularly in the United States. Think about going to a grocery store, there's all kinds of stimuli coming at you. Maureen mentioned my first book, Devoured, which is really about a lot of the marketing techniques that are involved with that. And it's trying to help you essentially be the prescription lenses for you as you're navigating this, to see clearly and to align your food choices with your values. Not in a self-righteous kind of way, but in a voting with your fork, voting with your grocery basket. How do you, through the choices you have day in, day out, through at least hopefully 3 meals a day. If you're like the majority of Americans, you probably also snack. These are opportunities to send powerful signals into the marketplace about what you care about in the world. So for me, when I say, is it good for you? It's yes, about nutrition, but it's really the whole you. Does it bring you joy? Is it delicious? Is it tied to heritage? Perhaps it's a source of comfort or nostalgia. Does it make you feel good after you eat it? Do you feel energized? Do you have mental clarity and so forth? Is it good for others? For me, this is all the people and animals affected from farm to fork throughout the food chain, often referred to as the hands that feed us. So it's animal welfare, it's social justice, it's worker well-being, wages, supporting small businesses, especially during COVID. I've had many opportunities to talk specifically about Corona conscious eating, so we can get into some of that during the discussion. But as I said, this framework is really meant to be evergreen. And, is it good for the planet? This one's a bit more straightforward, but essentially this is all the ecosystems, the land, water footprint, carbon footprint, the imprint of food production on our living, on our natural world. And with this mental checklist, as I call it, the idea really, as I said, is to, in the aggregate, you individually can have a huge, huge difference because of the push and pull. So as we think about, a lot of people like the idea of changing the food system. It's going to take changes in the actual food environment. That happens through policy, that happens through food companies that change their products. But it also happens from the demand that is generated by you collectively as empowered conscious eaters. And so that's really the spirit of the book. It's also about aligning these different values. So often we can get tunnel vision and just be really super focused on, let's say, you really understand the environmental impacts of your food. That's great. Maybe you understand the water use of certain foods. Maybe you're laser focused on avoiding added sugar, avoiding, lots of highly processed foods. But often these things are seen in silos and we're not looking at them through the holistic set of apertures. When in reality, the good news is more often than not, what's good for you tends to be good for others, tends to be good for the planet. And that makes it, there are trade-offs, certainly, times where you'll have to kind of decide which of these values do I care most about. Perhaps it's instance by instance, often it's context specific. But the good news is typically you can actually align these all together. So the book is divided into 4 parts: stuff that comes from the ground, stuff that comes from animals, stuff that comes from factories, and stuff that's made in restaurant kitchens. To give you just a little bit of an idea, I start the book with stuff that comes from the ground because one of the big takeaways of the book is that one of the kind of most overarching umbrella themes for how to make food choices that are good for you and for others is to emphasize foods that come from the plant kingdom. Doesn't mean you need to go full vegan or vegetarian. If you are drawn to that and you can sustain it over your lifetime, great for you. But for many people, it's more of a flexitarian way of eating. And this is actually the direction that scientists clearly, universally or unanimously are telling us we need to head as a global population in order to align optimal nutrition within what's called planetary boundaries. What is the carrying capacity of planet Earth for generations to come? This pyramid from Barilla Center for Food and Nutrition Foundation I have in the beginning of the book because I think it's such an elegant and fairly straightforward way to see how the conveniently great news, as I said, most often the foods that are good for you are good for the planet. So the fruits and vegetables, we know those are great for us nutritionally in terms of preventing chronic disease and so forth. They also tend to have the lowest environmental impact. This happens as well with plant proteins, pulses, and so forth. So we talk about foods from the plant kingdom. It's fruits, vegetables, whole grains, nuts, legumes, seeds, plant oils, and as I'll talk about in a moment, also plants from the sea. So don't forget about those. Each section of the book has 5 top takeaways because there's 60 short and sweet kind of bottom line answers to the most top of mind questions about what to eat. This book is evidence-based and it's really a condensed, Maureen gave a good, I think, description, but it's kind of the, it's not the encyclopedic answer to everything. It's the actionable, I call it radically practical pieces of information that you need to know in order to make an informed choice that you can feel good about. And that's really the goal. If you're intrigued by any of these topics, there are entire books on the subject. And I'll give some examples of that later on. But the top 5 takeaways are a way to also kind of show how, okay, there's all these different topics. It's like coconut oil versus olive oil, arsenic and rice and so forth. But at the end of the day, these are kind of the take-home messages to really keep in mind. What we're really going to focus on today, and I'll just stop sharing for a second here, is seafood in particular. And there's kind of a couple of themes here that we wanted to dig into. There's many topics in the book, as I say, but certainly being in Boston, Northeastern New England, this is of a special relevance. One of the kind of main issues that I think is often hard to reconcile is that folks will hear about overfishing. So as an example, we've about 90% of the top underwater predators have been wiped out. Cod, there's a famous book by Mark Kurlansky entirely called Cod on this issue in detail, which dried up altogether in the North Atlantic. Bluefin tuna in the Pacific is at 3% of its original volume. Unfortunately, we're on track to keep eradicating many remaining species in the coming years. So overfishing is a big issue. And this has largely gotten out into the public. But then what happens is we have these words about overfishing and depleting the oceans at the same time that nutritionists are telling us actually there's underconsumption happening from an optimal health perspective for protecting yourself from long-term chronic diseases, also just ideal kind of dietary quality. And there's nuance to this. And this is like kind of, again, a theme of the book is that both can be true. And what we need to do, the optimal way to address this is to increase fish and seafood consumption, but a greater variety of species to avoid that overfishing, what's often called underutilized or underloved, as UMass Amherst has described. Underloved species, these might be unattractive. They were formerly actually referred to as trash fish. But they're perfectly good fish. They maybe just don't look as, Instagram worthy on a plate until some amazing chef comes along. And now there's a lot of great activity happening. There's direct sourcing programs that are like dock to dish, for instance, that's actually supply driven instead of demand driven. So instead of, the typical models of saying I as a household, grocery shopper or as a food service leader saying I want tuna and I want cod and these normal, these very common things, halibut, it's actually what is available in great abundance, what's in season. What is also the other big areas to know about when thinking about sustainable seafood is what about habitat damage and bycatch? Meaning what is the equipment used? And bycatch is this issue where you actually end up bringing up to the boat things that you're not trying to catch, turtles and the like, birds, other things that really we don't want to be harming in the process of procuring food from the sea. So seafood is complex, but there are some general takeaways. There's a lot of great third-party certifications. Seafood Watch is one that's used. Maureen, I don't know if you can speak to that, if Maureen can use that, but many food service programs use these as general guidelines. Marine Stewardship Council. I'm speaking more from the perspective of you as a grocery shopper. What do you look for? And actually, when you go to the grocery counter, sometimes, or the seafood area, sometimes they have these ratings for you, as well as on like canned salmon, for instance, will tell you if it's sustainably sourced and through that Marine Stewardship Council certification. So it can be complicated. The way I think about conscious eating is that transparency is the name of the game. And when it comes to grocery shopping, third-party auditors are the referees of that game. It's not to say they're perfect, but it's that there is criteria to what they're telling you. The terms like sustainable can be very greenwashed. They can come to mean nothing. There are many other words like natural and so many others I go through that are actually meaningless. And so when you have those third-party certifications, it at least means that someone had a checklist of practices that are deemed to be, ensuring available populations of that species for long periods of time. And they went to the trouble of actually evaluating those fisheries management practices in the case of seafood. There are many other examples of third-party certifications, organic, fair trade, B Corp, and so on, that apply to environmental as well as social issues. So the other thing to keep in mind when it comes to seafood is I mentioned plant-based foods from the sea. So, you know, we want to, as this theme around plant forward, and this is an example of some, there's a lot of visuals in the book. So this is an example of kind of a cheat sheet that aligns high or omega-3 content, low mercury content with sustainable sources, just as an example. But there's another resource I want to plug, which is the Future 50 Foods Report, which was produced by World Wildlife Fund and NOR, which is part of Unilever. But what this is part of a larger global effort to increase biodiversity. So when it comes to increasing variety of species that we consume in terms of fish and seafood, part of that is just, as I said, the underloved, but also it's lower on the food chain. That has to do with all kinds of different things, but not only the animals, right? So we want to look at these are examples. Algae is an example of essentially a plant protein from the sea. It looks kind of like a vegetable, right? We're going to hear about kelp in a bit, but I think it's just important to keep these options in mind. What this resource does, and what I speak to a little bit in the book, is that we have a real opportunity and obligation, but I would say a big opportunity to increase diversity in our diets overall. It might seem like we have a lot of diversity. We have tons and tons and tons of products. I think for my first book, it's like 40,000 items in the average grocery store. But the crazy thing is most of those are highly processed foods that actually come from the same raw ingredients, which are typically wheat, corn, and soy. Globally, about 60% of calories actually come from those three foods. And then you have the crazy situation too, where about 75% of the genetic plant diversity in agriculture has been completely lost since the year 1900. At the same time, again, 75% of the global food supply comes from just 12 plants and 5 animals. Kind of a huge missed opportunity, if you ask me, from a culinary perspective, from a the reason, just as from a environmental perspective around biodiversity, the reason that's so important is resilience in the face of climate change, one of the big reasons. So when you have a lot of monocultural type of farming that's planting the exact same thing year after year in giant amounts, as opposed to more diversified farming systems or using crop rotation, planting different things year after year, you can be more vulnerable to pest pathogens and in general has lower biodiversity in the surrounding area in terms of wildlife. And then you're just less resilient in the face of extreme weather patterns. So I don't know if any of you have read about the great, potato famine in Ireland. This is famous. When you are reliant on just a few things, if something wipes that out, you're far more able to feed the world, in other words. And so this is a growing area of consensus around increasing biodiversity on land and at sea. So just wanted to mention those two examples because they're ways where what we're going to talk about, Chef Tom is going to present this, but it's a way that often there's a whole world of discovery when it comes to conscious eating, and often it's positioned as being about sacrifice or giving up the things that you love most. That is not at all the idea. It's not a diet, first of all. It's really this intention to, as I said, align your food choices with your values throughout your life, and to understand, to raise your awareness around the impact of the foods that you have on all the areas that I mentioned. And do not let perfect be the enemy of the good, because there are countless opportunities to change, to make small changes, in your routines and the things that you do day in, day out. Your lunch, your go-to weekday lunch, your breakfast, coffee or tea ritual. Those things add up throughout your lifetime and have a far greater impact on your own health and on the planet than what you eat on Thanksgiving or what you eat on your birthday or on vacation. So again, it's embracing kind of the flexibility idea of flexitarianism, and you don't have to identify as a full-blown flexitarian to see that there's a lot of room for adventure, discovery, and lots and lots of deliciousness, as I think you'll see coming up now through our demo. So I'll turn it over to Chef Tom, and then we'll have some conversation.
Great, so welcome everyone. Yeah, so as Sophie said, we're going to talk a little bit about some underutilized species and a little bit about some kelp. So we have, we're fortunate enough to have one with a few other schools. We're fortunate to have won a grant from the Kendall Foundation. Actually two of them. So one of them has to do with advancing the use of kelp, finding different recipes and uses and how we can advance that. And also just the use of underutilized species. So today we have for you this sort of ugly looking fish is a monkfish. Some of you may have seen it before, others you may have seen it on restaurant menus. But this is a whole monkfish. You can almost see why it's underutilized, right? Because it's so ugly. I don't know if you can see on the camera here, just these giant teeth. It is truly an ugly fish. So no one wants to eat it, right? So over here, we've got actually the loin. So once you clean the fish, these are the loins. It looks great. It has a texture, as some of you may know, has the texture of lobster, and that's why it's referred to as the poor man's lobster. Also, these sort of puffy areas right here around the cheek, these are sort of prized monkfish cheeks. When I went to pick this up this morning, actually, the guys on the production line where we get our fish, we're actually cutting these out. So some people buy the monkfish cheeks as well as the liver. It's also very prized. So where do we get this? So we work with a company, perhaps like some of you do on the meeting today, from Red's Best. So we love working with Reds. Reds, I could go on all afternoon about Reds and all that good stuff, but just briefly, they really help us focus on the underutilized species. So today, obviously, as I said, we're going to do monkfish, but some of our other underutilized things that we use in the dining hall here at Northeastern, pollock, hake, haddock, skate wings, ocean perch, and dogfish, or I guess has now been renamed Cape shark. So anyway, so that's a little bit about our monkfish. So this, again, and it's so fresh. This thing was swimming off the coast of Chatham yesterday. And one of the other nice things about doing business with Reds is when you get your fish, you get a little QR code that you can scan on, and it'll tell you everything about the fish. It'll tell you, the species, the name of the boat, the name of the captain, where it was caught, and increasingly of importance, how it was caught. What methods of fishing, because we know there are some methods that are maybe not quite as sustainable. And I know here at Northeastern, our students are very interested in that. And it's when we do these things, it's really great to engage with them, and they ask some great questions when we have these things on the menu. Yeah, so without sort of further ado, we'll get right into it. So our monkfish, we're just going to just kind of do something a little basic with it. So I've got a sort of a Moroccan spice here. We call it Ras El Hanout. It's kind of a bit of a Tunisian, spice. It's made up. It's not a chili, but when I say like a chili, where it's made up of many different ingredients, and as many of you probably know, that when you're using chili, every country, every sort of village or community has their own blend of chili. Much is the same with this as well. So what we're going to do is just pull a little bit out. We're just going to dust our fillet with it. We're going to add just a little bit of salt and pepper to our loin. A little bit of oil. More salt. And we want to add some oil to our pan. For me, I also like to add a little bit of, I don't add too much salt, but I like to add a little bit of salt and pepper right in with it, as the oil gets hot. All right. So we're coating our fish nicely. And like I said, we just want to dust our fillet with it. We don't have to put it on too heavy.
Yeah, and Jeff, just to jump in there too, I'm so glad that you raised that
Right.
issue about the traceability, because one of the issues I
And we
described
can
in the
see
book
little
was related
wisps of smoke sort of come from our pan, so we know that that is going to be ready.
I'll tell you later.
And that's a beautiful sound when we hear that sort of sizzle as it hits the pan. Gonna add a little more oil. I'm using cast iron today. You don't have to use cast iron. Cast iron offers a nice browning effect. It's also, we have some induction burners here, and obviously it's induction friendly. I don't want to get my fire too hot here. Normally I would, but I don't want to fill a room with smoke and drag us out. So while that's searing, I'm going to put together a little bit of a salad or a little bit of an accompaniment that's going to go with it here. So we talked a little bit about kelp. So we buy we can buy kelp in a few different forms. We can buy it, sort of slaw cut, as it's called, kind of shredded. It's been blanched. We buy it already blanched. And we can also buy it pureed. I don't know if you can see that, but it's just, just pureed for different, depending on what use you're gonna. Sometimes we use the pureed. We offer a miso soup here. Sometimes we whisk a little of the puree in with that, and we have a number of other recipes that we use it. So I think I'm gonna take my kelp, add it to our bowl, and I've also got a little bit of wakame, which is another form of seaweed. Got some shredded. I've also tried to make this a little seasonal as well, so I've also got some shredded Brussels sprouts and some edamame. And this is, again, this recipe is very flexible. You can do anything with it. I've also, but we all, butternut squash, right? And you are in New England, can't get enough of it this time of year. So I actually sliced it very thin and then pickled it. So much the same as we got some pickled red onions. We also pickled our butternut squash. And that's what I have here. So I'm gonna add a little bit of the pickled butternut. I think I'm gonna take a look at the fish here. It's got a nice sear on it. This is kind of a bigger loin, I would say. So if it's a smaller one, I'm hoping that we can just finish it right on the stove top here. But I've also got the oven going that we do have to pop it in the oven briefly. We can do that. Okay. So we also have some of the pickled red onion. Got some great colors going in. Radishes, which are a nice cold weather vegetable here in New England. We have some pomegranate seeds. Okay. And so what I'm going to do now is just give it a toss. I'm going to add too much salt. So if you've ever had kelp, it is a little bit salty, but it's not as salty as you might think. We had the good fortune of, when we won the Kendall grant, we got to go out on a boat and watch them and kind of help them do a little bit of the kelp farming for the day. You got to get an idea of what is kelp farming. And it's grown on these big long lines. It's pretty interesting. It's very cool, and it actually works out well. We went up to Portland, Maine to see this happening, and it actually the season actually works out really well for lobstermen. So this, when they're growing the kelp, this is on the off season of lobstering. So many of the lobstermen kind of transition to the kelp farming and then transition back again to lobster when the kelp season is over. So it works out well. Any kind of dressing would be good. I am just going to simplify it with some with just a little bit of olive oil, just a little bit. So it's not all that salty, so I am going to add a little bit of salt and pepper. I'm going to add one other ingredient I like to add. So we have some shiitake mushrooms here that I have poached in soy sauce. It's a little bit of a different technique. So they look great. And I'm going to add those in there as well. Add them all. Okay, we'll give this a toss. and it's colorful. You know, we're trying to, you know, make it seasonal. And this, I think, would also, I know it might be, you know, a little bit of a stretch, but with the Thanksgiving holiday, you know, sort of coming up, I think this is certainly got some ingredients in there that would lend itself to your Thanksgiving table and all, you know, offer a little bit of an alternative. So we're going to turn our attention back to the monkfish. Just so you can see it nice and brown, you can hear it doing some nice things in the pan. And it's really coming together nicely. So we'll give that just another minute. So one of the things I also wanted to briefly mention to you was that we, in our sort of thing about wanting to use kelp in different ways, we actually have some kelp pasta that we were, just before COVID hit, we were working with a manufacturer to make some kelp pasta for us. Not just for us, but if we got to a point where we liked it, open it up to, you know, whoever wanted to buy it, which is really the point of this whole thing, not just so we can buy it, but so everyone can buy it. And so I do have some of that today, but I wanted to show you that. So it's just pasta with, you know, kelp in there. You know, we have different batches about, you know, if you've ever done any of this kind of thing, and how does it taste, more salt, less salt, what color kind of do we want it to be? And this is kind of what we came up with. So you can also use that. Any of these things could, you know, make a nice pasta salad, you know, cold, or some of you, you know, you could heat it up a little bit as well. All right. So I think so I think we're ready now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to carve it. I think much the same as, you know, when you do your Thanksgiving turkey, you know, a lot of people like the theater of it in terms of, you know, carving it and it's just fresh, it's out there. We're going to, you know, this is something that you could do, I would say, tableside or right at the dining room table. Or just, you know, people love to see that. Here at Northeastern, we have something called the vegetable butchery, where we do roast vegetables and put them in the rotisserie and roast them and, you know, slowly rotisserie them. And then when they're ready, we actually put them on a cutting board and carve them in front of students. Sometimes it's a little hard to understand, like, what, you know, why are they carving a carrot or a beet? I don't get it. But once you explain it to them, you know, they understand. So I think if we put a little bit of our salad on the plate. Again, we got some great colors. I think we can feel good about, you know, a lot of the ingredients that are in there. Like I said, you know, sustainable with the seaweed, and kelp. Okay, so now we will carve it. However, you know, like your turkey, however thick or thin you'd like to do it. And ideally, this would, you know, maybe want another minute or two, or we could, like I say, flash it in the oven. But because of our time constraints today, I think if you know, layer it around like that. We've also got some microgreens. I think can go on top, a little toasted sesame around. We've got a really nice sustainable dish. So I don't know if anyone has any questions. I guess you put them in the chat box, but feel free to ask away. And that's what we have for you today.
Thank you so much, Chef. I don't know, can you hear me? Maureen can hear me. Okay, great. I don't know if you were able to hear me during your demo, but Chef, that was incredible. There are quite a few questions here. I was just going to add about, I'm so glad you mentioned traceability, because there's an issue that I describe in the book around illegal, unreported, and unregulated fish and seafood. There actually had to be a whole task force put together during the Obama administration. About 1/5 of fish and seafood caught worldwide falls into that category. There's also quite a bit of seafood fraud, unfortunately, about a third as of 2012. I really hope it's improved since then, but that's Oceana's report was as of that date, or as of that year, meaning that it's just labeled something it's not. And there's all kinds of issues when you don't have that supply chain transparency and traceability. And so I love the example that you gave, where you can really follow the entire journey and learn about who caught it, where, what were the, what was the population of the species in that area. And so it's just a really important corollary to what I was describing around third parties and traceability, or transparency in general. So that's really great. And that everything you have there just looks phenomenally delicious. So I think we're all quite excited to go try some kelp pasta as well.
Oh yes. So Sophie, I'm gonna ask you a question, then we're gonna dive into the questions in the chat, and you let me know if you want to just choose the questions out of the chat or you want us to kind of toss them to you. My first question for you is, here's, just for those of you, here's my book. So first of all, you all need the book. And it's just like, I have sticky notes and questions. And I mean, and I've been in the food business my entire life, and I still learned so much from this book. So it's one of those things you'll just kind of pick up. You're like, oh, I have a question about this. You're like, where can I? And you just grab the book. So highly recommend. How did you design this book to be evergreen in an ever-evolving food world? I mean, like you say, one day it's, this is good, this is bad, this is good, this is bad, and why add graphics?
Great question. So first, I'll start with the second one. So you know this better than many people, Maureen, but in general, we know that people learn differently, and not everybody wants to, I've distilled these huge encyclopedic topics down to about 1.5 pages, sometimes 2 pages. But even so, a picture's worth 1,000 words, right? And so a lot of times the infographics can convey the information either in a different way or quicker, or just in ways that are easier to understand. I also wanted to convey that this is fun. Often these topics can, I just talked about illegal seafood. There's a lot to contend with that's unsettling, disturbing, just a bummer. Climate change is a bummer to think about, but this is about action. And one of the kind of key themes that comes through in the book is, that I hope comes through in the book, is that food is one of the most powerful and yet one of the most overlooked tools you as an individual have at your disposal to make a meaningful difference in terms of climate action, period. There's even a quote from Dr. Walter Willett in the Eat Lancet report that says food is the single greatest lever for optimizing human and environmental health. I mean, if that's not a call to action, I don't know what is. And so with the graphics, it's meant to say, this is not doom and gloom. This is the opportunity at our fork tips. This is the boundless diversity and discovery that are the pathways to this greater future. And by the way, they're going to taste amazing. So it's really to ensure that it feels fun, actionable, not overwhelming. I also want this book to be incredibly accessible from I tried to think about talking to my, my 100-year-old grandmother about these topics, or my neighbors, or, chatting to maybe one of your many nieces or nephews, Maureen, at an elementary school level. A lot of these things are, because it's evidence-based, it can be very complex also. And so it's not that this is dumbed down, it's just that it's trying to get to the essential essence, the essential kind of nugget of what might be a useful thing to know. In terms of your first question, which I already forgot.
How did you design this book to be evergreen when
evergreen? Thank you.
Yeah.
It is a great question. So I have written for the New York Times now for, oh gosh, I don't know, many years. And I have the opportunity to answer reader questions. And it's really fascinating. It's kind of like therapy, right? Or being a food psychiatrist, because I get a sense of what are people's areas of, at least New York Times readers, which not representative of the whole population, but what are these are among even the most highly educated kind of readers out there, what are they confused about? What are their anxieties and areas of confusion? And what I find fascinating is a couple of things. So one is how there are some issues that just have been residually, they were so deeply ingrained into our culture, like the low fat, idea, right? And Northeastern is part of Menus of Change University Research Collaborative. One of the Menus of Change principles is go good fat, not low fat. But why do you need to talk about that? Why do I have a whole bunch of essays about fats? It's because this has been actually carried on from generation to generation, going back to the 80s. So it's looking for those issues that, whether it's because of celebrities or it's because of pop culture or other things, they got kind of stuck. Eggs is another big one, right? So why do I have a whole lot to say about eggs? Because I still have tons of people say, oh my God, you're eating eggs? Like, I'm supposed to be conscious and I'm eating eggs. And it's, you know, to show, okay, well, what does the data actually show? The data actually shows you can eat about on average an egg a day and you're good to go. And it's also incredibly affordable. It's the lowest environmental footprint of the animal proteins. It's, you know, got good stuff in it is the point. And so trying to sort of absolve some of us of the guilt that you may have when enjoying certain foods, and just trying to set the record straight in some cases. I think of this book in some ways as kind of the tiebreaker resource. So like, my Facebook friend says this, and my, you know, friend on Instagram, you know, such and such influencer said such and such on whatever, or, you know, Dr. Oz said that, and I read a blog post about, you know, this other thing. We have an environment, I described the food environment, we have an information environment that is very dogmatic. It is not often rooted in the science, and it's often driven by the kind of algorithms of the internet, which are clickbait. How do I get the most attention for this radical out there idea? I wrote about this in Devoured actually a lot, which is how you know, studies that just reaffirm what we already know, like blueberries, still good for you, never going to be a headline, probably not even going to get funded as a study, because it's the things that are counter to normal things. You know, plane falls out of the sky versus thousands of planes land safely. That's the kinds of things that make it into the news, that make it not just into news, but into viral content. And so we have to be aware that there's a huge selection bias happening in what even comes into our radars. And I wanted to just sort of try to re-elevate and amplify the kind of tried and true, the things that you maybe do know to be, like fruits and vegetables, good for you. Eat them in any form you can, like period. There's a huge underconsumption crisis. 1 in 10 Americans eats the recommended amount of fruits and vegetables. That has not changed in like a generation or longer. So it's a little bit of going back to that kind of radically practical idea, and choosing the topics that I believe will be here for the long term, but then also trying to, again, just present this more as a framework. Here are the issues that from recent history, current to likely, you know, foreseeable future will be on our radars. There'll be new topics I don't know of. I couldn't include them because they're not even on our radar yet. But with this more evergreen framework, you're equipped and empowered. I think my hope is you feel equipped and empowered to kind of investigate whatever topic becomes the one, you know, of the day.
Thank you, Sophie. I just wanted to let you know too, Sophie, that we have a young lady who's a daughter of a colleague of ours at Northeastern, who's on probably a lunch break from K through 6 and is on the call too. So she's learning about this today too. So we do have a very expanded audience today. Carrie and John, they would like, are you okay if we ask you the questions? Okay. Carrie and John, over to you. They have all the questions lined up.
Sure.
Yeah, so we'll read the questions from the chat and then toss it to either Sophie or Tom. So the first one we have is there anything wrong with fisheries and fish farms, Sophie?
Great question. So yeah, I would have touched on this, but I didn't want to take up too much time, but this is a very important question. Is there anything wrong? The answer is it depends. That's not a terribly satisfying answer, but the bottom line is that you could think about fish farms, aquaculture, as the CAFOs of the sea. So CAFO is a confined animal feeding operation. And so the kind of norm in fish farming is very similar to the norm in livestock production, which is factory farming. It's too many creatures crammed into too little space, fed too much suboptimal stuff, making them too sick and fat. And you know, there's the saying that you are what you eat, but then also Michael Pollan has reminded us you are what you eats. And so that ends up in your body. There's antibiotics, pesticides, other chemicals, which again happen on land in the confined animal feeding operations. So There's a lot of reasons not to eat farmed fish when it's done that way, particularly though farmed salmon has a lot of these concerns with what they're fed. There's yucky chemicals, there's pink dye to make it look like the wild krill or the krill that wild salmon would be eating and that give them that great pink color. And then there's also the issue that it takes a lot of feed to produce farmed fish. So like, for example, it takes more than 15 pounds of wild fish to produce 1 pound of farmed tuna. So one of the themes in the book is also just about it's this very wonky term of feed conversion ratios, or it's essentially the efficiency. How efficient, how good is that food at becoming, or that feed at becoming human food? Animals in general are less efficient than just plants that we eat directly, to give you an idea. Corn and cows is another very widely stated example of this inefficiency. But so you have kind of these different issues, depleting fish stocks to produce the feed, to feed to farm fish. But not all aquaculture operations are created equal. And so this is where those third parties can be really helpful. There are some that are on land that are generally have lower environmental footprints, for instance, but it's very context specific. And so that's where the ASC aquaculture certified, aquaculture sustainable, I'm not thinking of the ASC part, but anyways, ASC certified is the little logo that is a helpful marker of those cases where it's actually great practices and you should feel really good about it, because the other issue, of course, is that it is a lot more affordable generally. There's many issues related to that. And so one of the questions about affordability, one of the other things to think about is when you're opting for more wild fish and seafood, it doesn't always have to be fresh. Frozen can be much more affordable, as can canned. Which, you know, again, you can kind of look at the nutrition labels, not too much sodium say, but by and large, these are ways to eat the wild options that are going to be more sustainable generally in ways that are more affordable.
Cool. So going back to your communications point from earlier, what is the one issue or message that you have had the most difficulty communicating to your readers?
That's a fun question. I think it's actually this affordability question. So I saw that was brought up. There is a deep crisis in general around the elitism of sustainable eating in particular, but conscious eating for sure. We think of like the Whole Foods crowd, and there's a lot of reasons for this. So the biggest one is to think about just economics. Right now, the defaults in our food environments are not the options that are generally best for us and others in the planet. So you have to be sort of a salmon. I'm talking largely about the retail environment, just to be clear. You tend to have to be kind of like a salmon swimming upstream, you know, sleuthing out the options where the nutrition facts panel and the ingredients list are kind of, okay, that's fine. Or maybe, you know, going to more curated grocery stores or whatever. But when options that are good for us, others on the planet, become the norm in terms of production practices, economies of scale will bring prices down. And so you'll have a situation where you have to be a salmon swimming upstream to not eat consciously. And that's the future that I'm excited about. I do not believe that education is enough to change behavior by any stretch. I wrote this book as, you know, it's like my side hustle. I have more than a full-time job working on the production side, because we have to change the availability of these options to change the economics and to make these affordable and accessible to all. I work with an organization called the Food for Climate League, whose mission is to democratize sustainable eating. So essentially what I offer is tips for within the environment we've got, within the marketplace that exists. You know, you think about things like organic is still only like 1% of total crop land, and these kind of statistics. How do you eat those options in ways that fit your budget? I give suggestions like, again, kind of frozen, eating seasonally tends to be cheaper as an example. So I have, you know, lots of ideas. Reducing food waste is a great way to using scraps as the start of your dinner ideas and so forth. All of those can be great budget friendly options, but it's all under the caveat that we're not where we need to be as as food supply yet to make it, and from a food policy perspective in terms of farmer incentives. So lots of changes that need to occur to truly change that at a systemic level. And in the meantime, trying to equip eaters individually to do whatever they can. I'll also just plug a book from my same publisher. It's called Good and Cheap, and my publisher's Workman. And this book is available for free, but it has an amazing set of creative recipe ideas, all for meals under $5 that you can cook yourself. And it's those kinds of things that I think are just really brilliant, where it's also just pointing out in that book, and I do as well, that a lot of the foods that are lower environmental footprint, like oats, a giant tub of oats, or a big old bag of beans, these things actually are very affordable. And so it's also trying to look at where are actually the existing alignments from a cost perspective. And it's not always the case, but there are many, many examples like legumes or the big old tub of oats where that is the case.
So to that point, do you have any sort of high level tips about practicing conscious eating while
On a budget?
to save time? Not so much the budgeting, but just sort of high level time saving tips.
Yeah, well, so I guess just like the other high level idea on the cost is to buy in bulk. Bulk not only is better for the planet, but it's better for your budget. In terms of time saving, the way I would think about this is decision fatigue. So a lot of conscious eating, why it's time consuming, is you have to like research all the stuff or decide, and it's like, oh, okay, instead of just having your streamlined, this is my go-to thing. That's separate from cooking, which, you know, the book is not really about that. What I suggest is really just starting small. What is picking one thing in your weekly routine that you can change tomorrow? Okay, so if you eat butter and toast every day, try peanut butter. See how it goes. Maybe you get you're like, wow, that was actually better than I expected. And you get positive feedback loops that from a behavior perspective reinforce they're like fuel in your engine to go see what else in your lifestyle you can go change. Often people will find it's addictive. You'll start to transfer way beyond food, right? Like, oh yeah, my sunscreen, or my whatever household products, cleaning products, right? So in terms of time saving, I think it really comes down to trying not to overhaul everything at once, and just looking for a small first step. You get and celebrate a small win. See if it snowballs into other things. And I think you will find that once you've put the upfront investment in some of those swaps, what you're now better for you, others in the planet breakfast is, what you're now better for you, others in the planet weekday lunches, and they become these just habits integrated into your life, you're done. You don't have to, keep investing in that change. So that's the other part, is just knowing that some of it is investing the time initially, and then it becomes your new normal, and you have time savings as you've just covered more ground throughout your lifestyle, if that makes sense.
That's awesome. We have a cooking question for Chef Tom over here. What are your tips to cooking thicker cuts of fish while trying to get that good sear?
Well, it's a great question. So I would say maybe a little, you need maybe not as high temperature as I was using today. So maybe a little bit, I don't say low and slow. You don't want it too low, because you don't want to, give it like it was, give it an appearance like it was boiled, or, no color at all. So maybe, just finding that right temperature based on your particular heat source, whether it be gas or electric or whatever it might be. You could also maybe cut it, or, butcher it, fabricate it into, maybe some smaller pieces a little bit. It's the same you would do with the chicken. If you've got, a big piece of chicken that's really thick, and that's sort of, the heel, the part of that chicken where you might, open it up and butterfly a little bit. Kind of similarly with fish, you could maybe, like I said, cut it maybe in a certain way.
I was wondering that too. Glad you asked that one.
So I think the last question we have time for from the chat is back to Sophie, and sort of a nice general way to end. How can we encourage others to be more adventurous eaters while still being conscious?
Yeah. So great. That's a great question. In my first book, I came across this concept that it sticks with me a lot. It's from NPD Group, which is one of several consumer insights firms in the U.S. And what they found is, often there's these like difficult or these seemingly paradoxical trends. People want to try cool new local cuisines, and they cite all kinds of interesting ingredients as being really hot and trendy and so forth. And then you look at what people actually buy, and it's like very standards, kind of tried and true, not that different types of meals from their years before. And so it's like, well, how can these two things both be occurring? And it comes down to their concept of novelty within the familiar. And I think that's a great way to introduce friends, family, and others, which is, okay, like think about, this has seen huge success in the burger category. Part of why something like Beyond Burgers and Impossible Burgers, or the CIA has popularized the idea of blended burgers, which is, replacing some amount of beef with seared mushrooms or something else. Part of why these have appeal is because people are like, okay, burger, I've had burgers before. I like burgers. I feel full afterwards. It's juicy, it's great. It's a form that's familiar, but the ingredients are different. So I would think about things like that, bowls. Maybe you've had a teriyaki bowl and you could now try bibimbap, or, what is it where you can just kind of move laterally, if you will, from something that you've already tried, had a good experience with. It's why I gave the example too of toast. So if you're slathering something on your toast that's less than optimal, is there something else you can slather on it? I'm a huge nut butteraholic. Maybe if you can't eat nuts, you could try seed butters, right? Sunflower seeds or something else. But again, going for kind of a similar form, and it's not as big of a leap. So that'd be my big kind of general idea. And I think you'll start to see there's many examples of that. So thanks for all the great questions, everyone.
Yes, thank you, everyone. And thank you so much, Sophie, for joining us. So the last thing that I just want to touch on, I'm about to put in the chat our book winners, as well as a way to contact us on how you're going to pick those up. So congratulations.
Oh my goodness. Look at all the book winners. Woohoo!
Exciting. Enjoy.
Sorry, a little bit of technical difficulty. I started putting my space bar into the text box. But yes, congratulations to these 10 winners. And I also just want to mention, for those of you who we weren't able to get to some of those chat questions, you can find Sophie in the mountains on Twitter at Sophie Egan M, and online, sophieegan.com. Thank you all so much for joining us. Sophie, so glad to have you here with us, and hopefully soon in person, so we can all see you, hear more about what you have to learn with us, and taste some of Chef Tom's delicious food. Thank you, everyone.
Look forward to that very much. Thank you for the invitation. Thanks, everyone, for joining. Take care.
Sophie.
Thanks again.